Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Peya, Pedig Zayin, Halacha Beis, Daf Samach. We left off on Daf Samach, Amud Aleph, 7 lines from the top of the Amud by the 2 dots. Actually, in the Gemara over here, the words begins with Ha Im Yesh Rasayim. We're going to actually take off adding the Girs of the Marafulda. But before we get there, I think it's very important to review where we are at. So on Daf Nun Tes Amud Beis, the Gemara explaining the first case in the Mishnah. The Mishnah speaks about a scenario where you have 3 rows. Each row has 3 olive trees. And the center tree, the Mishnah says, is excluded from the din of Shikha. To which Rabbi Lazar says it has to do with the concept of Mechusa / Tamun. And the Rabbi Yechanan connects the Mishnah on Halacha Beis with the first rule we had on Halacha Aleph, that normally the tree in the middle was what he calls a tree from Noid. Noid was a location that had very distinctive, unusually great olive trees. And as the Gemara adds, it doesn't have to be dafka that it's objectively great. But Rabbi Yechanan connects the din in the Mishnah with that which we learned in the beginning of Perek Kol Zayis, that when you have a distinctive tree, meaning that even though you forgot it now, you probably will remember later that you forgot it, it's excluded from the din of Shikha. What the Gemara on top of Daf Samach brings a braisa to back up the shita of Rabbi Yechanan. So before we just repeat, it's very important Maraf folder because it really changes a lot, right? Where you can say it changes everything. It qualifies completely out of the way the literal understanding. The fact that the Mishnah, the braisa, makes a distinction regarding the middle tree between makiroi versus eina makiroi. Makiroi means that it's distinct, that you know that it's distinct. According to Rabbi Lazar, the din of the 9 trees has nothing to do with this thing. It has to do with the fact that it's mechusa. So the fact that it is makiroi, this eina makiroi, that in itself, that topic, that verbiage, that conversation is only shaykh l'shitas Rabbi Yechanan. That's simple. But before you go, but it's not so simple. Why not? Because if the Girsa is not the way we have it, the Shalom al Yisrael. But as the Marafulda first points out, he verified looking at the Tosefta proper. He looked at it, he says the Girsa Zashas, that the Braisa seems to be saying the opposite of what we know. The Braisa says that if it's Makiroi, if you know that the tree is from Noid, it's crazy. Then you cannot go back. Sounds like it. If you didn't know that it's from Noid, then you can go back. It's the opposite of what we're learning. We're learning that when it's makiroi, makiroi means when it's distinct, and you know that it's distinct, you can always go back to the tree. And so that's the problem with the girsa. The Marafulda builds. He has the ability to really qualify everything based on a sugya that we're going to have in a few daf from now, based on a sugya based on a Mishnah that we have here in Daf Samach Vav, when the Mishnah differentiates when it comes to shikha between a vine that's laying on the ground versus a oros, which means a trellised vine. A trellised vine is a vine that's more chashuv for the owner. The fact that you build a trellis, and what we clearly see by the oros is the following. When you walk by the vine, mamish walk by it. If it's laying on the ground, you no longer can turn back to it. That's the din of leisashav lekachta. If it's trellised, even though you physically walk by, as long as it's within your arm's reach. The Gemara says that, which means that if you stand where you are, but you turn backwards, you can reach back and touch it, you can still go back to get it. In other words, the more chashuv a vine is for the owner, the later we apply the din of leisashav lekach. Argues the Marafulda, l'Rabbi Yechanan, this is not necessarily, according to everyone, the same should be understood over here. And before we go into the intro of today's daf, which isn't that big, let's read it again because we said it correctly yesterday, but it's unbelievable. You have to hear it again after learning 2 daf because it's changing a lot. So we can begin wherever we want. Let's begin 6 lines from the top. Once we substantiate the girsa that we indeed have in the Gemara. It says the Marafulda daf Samach, v'zeh perushay, v'med dvarim amurim, that what? To have a shikha, kishahoya makiroi, shikha kishahoya makiroi, if it's makiroi, what did we say? If it's distinct, it should never be shikha. Meaning, v'hainu, to have a shikha, ba'avra mimenu, achi enu yochel, lifshay yadiv elitloi. Shikha means, you're right, when you walk by the tree, because it's distinctive, you can still go back to get it. but not forever. Only if it's within your hand reach. But even by the din of distinctive, if you went beyond the shear of, now it's no longer now it will be shikha. So that's the first thing that the Marafulda clearly says. And again, I don't have to read it inside because he proves it from the sheet of Rabbi Yechanan, Benegeya, the oris, the trellis vine. Now, V'lachein, look 3 lines under the Gemara in the Marafulda, in the middle of the line, V'lachein, but it's by you have a comma. Omar, that's the meaning of the Braisa. That what? That even though it's makira, it's manche makira, but the other kol kach means it's not even within your arm's reach, even though it's distinctive. You know why it's shekha? That's because you knew it and you overlooked it. If you never knew that it's nedunyan, which means it's the special tree. And if you would have known, put a point over here. There is where we say something even more. Even if you walk by 100 amas away, wow. Now, this is such a gavaldic thing. In other words, we have a concept that future knowledge prevents the now of being subject to shekha. You know, b'avodas Hashem, that's a big musar hastam. What's when you know something and you forget it, your forgetting it is more significant. You knew it and you forgot it. If you never knew it, then your forgetting is less effective. That was the Rebbe's argument when it comes to golos. In other words, if Yidden are not yet fully observant, okay, not okay, but that we don't know. If we would have known, like the whole idea of a Tinnik Shenishba versus a person that knew. In other words, we don't know enough to say, we knew and we rejected. We never knew. And our future knowledge already does not allow for our current forgetfulness to be halachically significant. That's a beautiful concept. Okay, I just wanted to repeat that. We said it correctly, but it's like, wow, the Gabbai was struggling with it. You hear it twice, you hear it 3 times. Now, is this according to everyone? Lav dafka. The Marafulda emphasizes it's a braisa, but lav dafka, everyone follows it. It just, we see this by the trellis lit Rabbi Yechanan. So you have by a common vine, you walk by shikha, chashiv vine, you walk by, it's not shikha, but not lo'olam vad. Only if it's within your arm's reach. And then beyond that, now we have a new nuance. If you never knew, and if you would know, when you will know, you're not going to walk by it, then it's never shikha. Okay. Now, what we're going to have in today's daf, we're going to go the whole daf samach, the whole little daf samach. We're going to go over every single case in the Mishnah on daf that we had over here. Just go back on daf nun tes amud aleph. And the challenge, the next shtickle in the Mishnah was that if a zayis has 2 saw and you forget it, it's not shikha. It's a very straightforward din in the Mishnah. We actually had it in the previous chapter. The challenge we will have is that the Mishnah, if you look inside the Mishnah on daf nun tes, the Mishnah writes afterwards, now normally when you have the words it goes to the line above it. Well, now we already learned the Marafulda that taught us how to learn the Mishnah in the Maskan of today's Gemara. The Havamina is it's a flow, and that's going to create certain problems that the Gemara is going to resolve by saying that this Bamed Varam Amurim goes back to the beginning of the Pedic. Actually, we're going to learn the Gemara Lafi, the Pnei Moshe. Let me just say by heart what he's going to say, a big chiddush, that if you have a tree that's distinctive, and it also has 2 saw of which you forgot, or let me make it clear. If you walk over a distinctive tree, let's now put aside the Marafulda, the details. If I walk by a distinct tree, there's no shikha. Forever, up until a certain point. If I walk by, if there is a distinct tree, Mishnah Daf Nun Tes, and you begin to harvest it, and in the middle of the harvesting, for whatever reason, you forget to harvest all of it, and then you walk by all of it, the Mishnah says in Daf Nun Tes, you cannot go back. There is shikha. There is shikha. What happens if that which you left over has 2 saw? That's going to be the way the Pnei Moshe is going to understand the Mishnah. Another nuance. In other words, if you have what we call tarta l'malyusa. Number 1, it's a distinctive tree. Number two, even though you began, but that which you left is too small, you have to have both according to the Pnei Moshe. Then, even though you began, you are allowed to go back. It's no shikha. According to the Pnei Moshe, if you have a tree that's not distinctive and it begins with 4 saw, and you harvested 2, and you took a coffee break, and then when you came back, you forgot that you had the other 2. According to the Pnei Moshe, even though there is 2 saw, you also cannot go back. There is shikha because you forgot it. Only if it's both distinctive and there's 2 saw, that is, or you never began. It's one of the 2. And the Mishnah further at the end of the Mishnah Daf Nun Tes, we had a concept of kol zman sheyesh li tachtov yesh li beroishoy, to which Rav Meir says on top of Daf Sama Nun Tes Amud Beis that it has to do mishetela chamachba, and we're going to push it, see how there are 2 different ways of understanding the Mishnah, and subsequently it's going to give us 2 different ways of understanding Shitas Rav Meir. Basically, what we're going to have from the 2 dots until the end of the little daf today is going back to every clause in the Mishnah. Every line you'll see will be nuanced, will be qualified, and there'll be certain things that will be left open as option A and option B. Okay, so again, even though you have ha im yesh b'isosayim, what we're going to do is that we will dafka follow the girsa of the Marav Fulda. That first of all, the Mishnah says, "B'med dvarim amurim b'zman shelo yischol boy." We're going on that. Avalim yischol boy, right? Then I feel because I san a toifa b'shato v'ushachacha yesh leishikha. In other words, we want you to remember that even if you have a distinctive tree, if you started it and then you forgot the remainder, it is subject to shikha. The Mishnah also said this concept of tusa. So the Gemara is asking, wondering, ha im yesh b'isosayim u'shachacha eiloi shikha. What happens if there's a tree that has tusa? And let me say the way I'm saying it, you began to harvest it, Mendel, you began to harvest it. And you stopped in the middle. And what you left was 2 saw. So when the Mishnah says, Avalim Hischel, because you see, Avalim Hischel is a hemshech. After the Mishnah says, if Bamed Varam Amurim goes to the line behind it, Bamed Varam Amurim, that it's not shikha if you didn't begin. But if you began, even if what you left has 2 saw, yesh lo shikha. But that's not true. The Gemara begins by telling you in yesh b'shashayim u'shachachai, it's not shikha. The problem is that first of all, this statement is true, but it doesn't fit with the flow of the Mishnah, and therefore clarifies the Mishnah that when the Mishnah says the words "Bamed Varam Amurim," Bamed Varam Amurim is linking Bizman Shelo Yischol Boy to the line above it. We're going to learn the Gemara with the Pnei Moshe, which means that the Gemara is really going to say Bamed Varam Amurim is linking it both. Use these words, both with the line above it and with the opening of the Perek. Because we learned about the concept of a tree that has osayim, even if it's not distinctive, the whole tree you skipped over ain't a shikha. We learned in the beginning of the Perek that if the whole tree was skipped over, but the tree is distinctive, the whole tree, no shikha. The Mishnah now is saying that if you began in what? If you began with the distinctive tree and you stopped in the middle of the distinctive tree, too late. Now there's shikha. So says the Gemara that if you have a distinctive tree that you began with, and that which you skipped over in that tree is too saw, then ein loy shekha. Then ein loy shekha. That's the line. Ein loy shekha. Says the Gemara that loy al hado is amras the bamed varam amurim isn't only, add the words only, isn't only going back to the din of sasayim elo al hado kadamaisa. It's also linking it with that which we had in the beginning of the Perek. That what? That calls like a tree. That when it's the special time to harvest it, the olives are so packed, they're so saturated with oil that they drip on their own, even though you forgot the entire tree ain't a shikham. Alei is amras, and this the Mishnah is ruling that what? That if you began harvesting the zayis hanatoifa and you stopped in the middle, then yes, shikha. However, now also link it. Also, ho im yesh b'isosayim, which means that not only was it distinctive, but you began. But that which you left in that tree, not the whole tree, that which is you forgot, is osayim u'shechachai. Then eino shekha, and look inside the Marafu, the Pnei Moshe. We don't have to read the whole Pnei Moshe. Begin in the second to last medium-sized line, or 6 lines mamish from the bottom. The kiven the ikava karta lemal yusa, which means shu ba'atzma yesh lo shem basada, and the yesh lo boy bahanishad davar chashuv. Davar chashuv means tu sab lo have a shikha. That's very important. So now Shlomo, I have to help up over here. The Pnei Moshe is learning 2 things. Number 1, if I harvest a distinctive tree and I stop in the middle, and then when I return to my harvesting, I forgot the remaining. If the remaining is not to sub, that the Mishnah says explicitly, shikha, because you won't remember it. You're going to say, oh, I had this special tree. I'll remember that I began. Another din. If I have a non-distinctive tree, but the whole thing has two saw, and I skipped it, not shikha. But if I began to harvest it, a normal tree, and I forgot to saw in the tree, yes, shikha. But if you only, when you have both, it's a shade, it's a distinctive tree. And that which you left over is a sosayim, even though you began, you're not going to forget. I'm telling you, this is a good sugya. First of all, we're learning Torah, but you want to understand what allows people not to forget. So even when you forget, you should remember. If something was always chashuv to you, yesh lo shein, and if the quantity that you forgot is a davar chashuv, you're not going to forget. It's going to bother you. And you're going to go back, and you're going to go back, and you're going to go back. It happens to all of us. When we forget a part of Torah and it doesn't bother us, so we don't go back and make it up. When we forget a lot, I think we start saying, oh my God, I forgot the whole thing. I got to relearn the whole Masechta. You go back, you remember it. You remind yourself of it. Okay. So that's number one. Now, Kol Zman Sheyesh Leitachtav. Again, I think it's Kedai. Just go back to Daf Nun Tes and read the last line in the Mishnah. Kol Zman Sheyesh Leitachtav Yesh Leberoishoy. And turning to Daf Nun Tes on the base, and I've made Omer Mishetela Chamachabo. Now, let me repeat how we learned it when we learned the Mishnah yesterday. And now you're going to see how the Gemara is going to tell you that there are two options of implications from the Mishnah. They're not contradicting each other, but they're very different. When you harvest an olive tree, first of all, the way it was done is that they had a stick that was called a machba. That stick had two functions, just to make more clarity, more than yesterday. Number one is you would beat the tree. In other words, olive trees. You know olive trees from Los Angeles. You cannot climb up on an olive tree. The branches are not shtar chazak. It's not the strongest tree. If today you have ladders, if you don't have a ladder. But with the stick, you bang the olives down when they're ripe enough. On top of that, since there's so many branches, even though when you look up, you might not see any olives, but in between there might be olives. So you would search, make abadikas olives. You would use that stick. You would look in between the branches, and if you would see more olives, you would bang again. Being that you're not picking it with your hands, what happens when you bang? It falls on the ground. So before they would harvest this tree, I'm assuming they would put a shmata on the ground. They would bang it down. So the ratio of the Mishnah, the Chachamim, the last line in Daf Nun Tes is that if you still have olives under the tree, l'choyde, that means the person did not move on yet. Because everyone knows before you move on, you pick the olives that are on the ground. Even if you didn't know for sure whether there are olives on the top or not, the way we explained it correctly yesterday, we're going to learn more nuance today. The way the halach yelech is that you collect, when you collect the olives on the ground, you take one more look up. So if there's olives on the ground, we know it's not shikha yet. And the way I understand it, Danny, is that even if this guy moved to the next tree, it's not everyone goes mamash tree thoroughly. They do a little bit here, a little bit there. As long as olives on the grounds, everyone sees. So if there's olives on the grounds, you plan to go back. And not only do you plan to go back to pick up the olives on the grounds, when you go to the valley, you look up. So the whole tree is not subject. You didn't move on yet, even if physically you moved on. Let's go with that. Now, what is Rav Meir saying? Rav Meir is saying something else. Rav Meir is arguing with the Tanakama. We need to know how. So before we go into Rav Meir says it has to do with did you search on top of the tree? Now, I know we read the Marafulda, but let's see in our Gemara two ways of the Chachamim, and now you'll chap whichever one it is. On that, Rav Meir is saying something. But before we go to Rav Meir, we have to understand the Chacham. So, Kozman sheyesh le'tachtav yesh le'birosh. That's the one-liner. So says the Gemara, I want you to know, Psar lon trein pisrin. There are two ways of interpreting the Mishnah. The words that the Mishnah say are not to be interpreted in two ways. We said correct. Yesh le'tachtav, yesh le'birosh. However, there is what the Mishnah says, and there is what the Mishnah implies. And there are two options of what the Mishnah is also implying. Option number one is which means that once the owner finished the olives beneath the tree, the harvest of this tree, Chevre, ended. And therefore, what? Even if we discover later that there were still more olives on top of the tree, what I'm saying now is Lukola Alma. Those olives are Shikha. Yesh le'tachtov, yesh le'birosh. So what is the opposite? This is the simple implication of Kula Alma. That if there is no more tachtov, Shloima, there's no more tachtov, and you moved on, that's shikha. Okay. Abed, koydem lachein means what happens if there is nothing under the tree because you did not even begin to bang it yet. One thing is clear. Just because there's nothing under the tree, if you did not begin to bang it yet, you can't say that the whole seed subject to shikha, right? And that's what the Mishnah is saying. In other words, there's two phases. Before you begin to harvest, having nothing in the bottom of the tree means nothing. There's nothing in the bottom of the tree because you didn't begin to harvest. Once you begin to harvest, once there's olives on the bottom of the tree, then what is moving away, forgetting when you gathered, if you didn't gather the tachtov, yesh lo b'rosh. Aval pisha ein lo tachtov, before you begin to harvest, yesh lo b'rosh. So all the Mishnah is adding is that there's pre-harvest, then there's once you begin to harvest, and once you begin to harvest, then we have the klal. Prior to the beginning of the harvest, of course, there's nothing tachtov because you didn't get to yet. You're going to say there's no novelty with this. I know there's no novelty with this. All the Gemara is trying to point out is that you can learn the Mishnah, which is exactly the way we learned it yesterday. All the Mishnah is saying is that once you begin to harvest, even though you walked away from the tree, and when you walked away, you didn't know there's more b'roshai, since you were for sure planning to pick up that which is tachtov, and when you pick up the tachtov, that's the way it works. When you pick up, you take one more look, so that means you didn't walk away yet. You didn't finish harvesting if you still have tachtov. However, there is an option that the Mishnah is implying something completely different. Implying. Option number two, psar, right? Ached would be in the Bavli, and here we take away the aleph, and we go straight psar choyram, the other interpretation. Now listen to this. Kol zman sheyesh lo tachtov. As we said before, the explicit is not going to change. Yesh lo b'roshai. However, now we're going to go into what the Tanakama holds concerning the Machaba, which we never spoke out yesterday. And on that, Rav Meir has a comment. Hilkach, HaMachaba, the person whose job is, it can be the same person, another person, to use that Machaba instrument to search in between the branches. Right? And he already went through the tree, Danny. We never spoke about this before. What happens if you had a person that didn't only look up, they actually used the machba to search. And the person did not find anything. That farmer, even when there is tachtov olives, and the olives that are tachtov are not shikha, he didn't pick them up yet. Even the Tanakama will hold that if there is taka olives on top of the tree, shikha. In other words, when do we say the words in the Mishnah that it calls man sheyesh lo tachtov yesh lo b'roshai? That is if there was no machaba. Not before you harvest, once you begin to harvest. When there was no one properly searching the tree, there is where we say is that as long as there are olives under the tree, the person who's harvesting will always look up when he picks it up and he might find more. So if you didn't pick it up yet, you can't argue that the ones on top of the tree were forgotten. No, it wasn't finalized. That is only when you're not using the machaba. The moment you have this person searching through the tree, then there are times which will be after the person searched through the tree and he told the harvester or he told himself there is nothing there yet. There is nothing there anymore. There's ended. Even though there is tacht of olives, he was not planning to look up anymore because he already went searching through it with a machaba. You get it? And on that, what does Rav Meir say? This is Gavaldik. And on that, what does Rav Meir say? You have the words of Rav Meir. That Mishetelach HaMachaba. Which means, let's read this inside. Well, let's read it. But here, but the machba goes away. Means, guys, means that if after the machma walked away, even if there are olives on top of the tree, and even though you didn't pick up the tachtov, even though you did not pick up the tachtov, you don't have any more on the roishay. Why? Because the machaba was here. But nevertheless, yesh lo tachtov. Gewaldig.
Rav saying in both interpretations.
Let me go. I want to go first to this one. Rav Meir is saying, Mendel. Okay, I got it. I remember. Rav Meir is saying that once the machba walked away, listen to this, you don't even have the olives that are under the tree. Rav Meir is saying that it's solely determined on the machba. That's why he's saying that if the machba goes away, mishetelach hamachba. Now, let me go back to what Mendel is asking. According to the first implication, that the Tanakama was not alluding to the machba at all, according to the first interpretation, Tanakama is saying, if you didn't begin to harvest, none of it is sheikhah. Once you begin to harvest, it's all about, is there under? If there's under, you have what's on the top. If there's nothing under, you don't know what's on top. Says Rav Meir on that, Mendel, that even if you don't have under, as long as the machba didn't leave, you will still look on the top, because when you harvest olives, whoever is harvesting knows we need to make a thorough search. It means even though you gathered the bottom and you looked up and you didn't find it in your mind, I'm waiting for the machba. That's Rav Meir. Tanakama says no. Tanakama says if you pick up the grapes that are underneath it, you lost the grapes on the tops. According to the second interpretation, the Tanakama is also alluding to the machba. And what the Tanakama is implying, listen to this, that's almost the opposite of what's written, that even in Yesh Lo Tachtov, you only have Beroishai if there wasn't a machaba. If there is a machaba involved, and the machaba already searched on top, listen to my words, even if Yesh Lo Tachtov, what's on top is Shekha, but what's on the bottom? What's on the bottom is yours. And that Rav Meir says, even what's on the bottom is not yours. If you walked away from the tree, you can never go back to get what's on the bottom. Because the way people harvest is that they follow the machba. If the machba searched and you walked away from the tree, everything is shikha. The Tanakama holds that even after the machba walked away, the tachtov is yours. Gewaldik. Okay, these are the two options. Says the Gemara, and by the way, the Gemara is not telling you which one is correct. It's just pointing out that you have two ways of understanding what the Tanakama is saying, and subsequently, what does Rav Meir coming to add? Says the Gemara, Tani Mishum Beishamai, another rule that we never spoke out, but it's based on this concept that when people would harvest, there would be certain ways of harvesting. Prior to doing a certain step, there's no shekha. Post that step, since people would end with that step, everything that's forgotten is forgotten. What is the Raisa talking about? He's quoting Rabbi Shammai that Mishioniach, and we're going to go with the Girsa as Habarakar. Barakar is a certain type of knee padding that people will use when they harvest olives. Dafka, because like we mentioned, you would beat the olives to the ground. You would have to gather them from the ground. To gather things from the ground, some people are flexible, they can bend down. Most people are not as very flexible. They need to get down on their hands and knees. And they had special clothing that would protect their knees from getting hurt. So he says that Mishioniach es habardar ugemaroi. When you put on the knee pad, you still have that which is on the top. Meaning that once you remove, it's the implied, once you remove the knee pads, that means you completely finished harvesting this tree. Then nothing on the top can you go back to take. Everything on the top is shikam. Danny, you got it? So in other words, we have this machaba. You can almost maybe even say, I mean, we're learning this, these are new ideas. It has to do with the way people would harvest, maybe.
So what is the sign that you're done harvesting this tree?
That's right.
You have knee pads, finishing the...
That's right.
Aqua.
Just having stuff on the ground. Very good.
Right.
Says the Gemara, and now the Gemara simply wants to know, let's look into my Marafulda. We have time. It's 4 lines from the top. Misheniachas habar kor ugemara. Behind it. Misheloiket, whoever is gathering the olives, he has to call on his knees, and he will put on his knees, a certain type of leather. Shall be skibble that has a recipient, shall use like one so his knee should not get hurt from being on the ground. But Rabbi Shammai is saying is on the up implied, until you remove it, everything on that tree is still yours. Meaning, once you remove the barakar, that means you moved on. If you moved on from that tree, according to this Rabbi Shammai, even if you didn't thoroughly search it with a machaba, doesn't matter. That's the way. You would not remove it unless you finished. Once you finished, you moved on. Says the Gemara, why is this knee padding called barkar? Because it's a composite from bar, like bar mitzvah, not a son of, not always. Bar means the item of the kra by bara, karo davua. We have that expression. The knee. Okay. Amar Ababo. Or kriya, very good. Kira, very good. Amar Ababo shuku mishayir es hamachavoyin. The reason why, the reason why the Rav Meir, I mean, the only one that mentioned explicitly machaba, which is the guy that's searching. You want to know what barkar means? I want to know what machaba means. The word machaba means hidden. Right? That this Shuhu, the Machaba, is the one that's Mishayer. He Esamachaboyin. Where do we find that Machaba means something that's hidden? Pasuk in Shmuel, they were speaking about Shaul HaMelech. Shaul HaMelech was looking for David HaMelech. This is when he was not looking for him for good intentions. So the word over there was Uru'u. He told a group of people, Uru'u, Udu'u, Mikoil Hamachaboyin Ashi Yischadasham. Go find out where are the hidden places that he can hide out. And by the way, it's interesting. We're making a link over here. David HaMelech is connected to Mashiach, which is connected to Shemen. And we're talking about olives. We'll stop over here. And God willing, tomorrow with the new Mishnah, Allah Gimel and Daf Samach Aleph.